Malcolm Hoenlein, shalom.
Shalom, good to be with you again.
Thank you for coming to our studio. You're, of course, the Vice Chairman Emeritus of the Conference of Presidents and President of the Abraham Spirit. And you're here in Israel with the Conference of Presidents. How many days will be the visit of the event itself?
The conference lasts 5 days, 5 full days, but we did have a Shabbat pre-program and did chesed projects with many of the members of the conference in advance of the mission itself.
Now, I want to delve into one of the hot topics. You probably organized this event, and you were sure that it'll be a lot about the war, strengthening, understanding what's going on in Israel. But you're coming here as the United States is already pressuring Israel for a Palestinian state, and the issue of U.S.-Israeli relations is, again, a hot topic.
It is indeed a hot topic, both within the Jewish community and obviously here in Israel. First, I should say that the U.S.-Israel relationship remains very strong. The American people still remain committed to Israel. There is fringing on the outskirts of the community, but more in what we're seeing reflected on the campuses and in the streets of New York, the anti-Israel demonstrations, which, while still limited in number, draw hundreds, even thousands of people and create a tone. The media coverage has been very slanted as well. But if you look, Congress remains steadfastly supportive of Israel. The polls show the American people understand what Israel is facing. We have to do more to get them to understand the nuances and sometimes the choices Israel has to make. But I think that there remains a strong commitment. And if you see, the administration continues to provide arms to Israel, provide support, the UN and ICJ. There are issues that have arisen, particularly regarding proposals about a Palestinian state, the day after considerations, and pressures about what Israel must do in Rafah, etc. I think these should be dealt with quietly on both sides. I don't think I told this to President Obama on our first meeting, that the lesson of history is that there shouldn't be public daylight between the countries, that they should work out their differences quietly, and inevitably there will be differences, and especially when you're dealing with such complex and difficult situations as we face today, and America is under both external pressure and domestic political pressures that I think President Biden feels. But the fact is that he came out strongly, he came to Israel. You've had many visits of the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, and others, which is an indication of the strength of the relationship and that they want to work things out. But in a war situation especially, you can't dictate to a country that has gone through the trauma of what Israel went through on October 7th and try to minimize the options that are open to it. Israel obviously made a commitment and remains committed to the destruction of Hamas. But I will tell you that every Arab leader I speak to says to me, decimate them, don't listen to what we say, decimate them, because we will pay the price. And the fact is that if Israel is pressured to do things and to prematurely, and Jordan and Egypt will pay the first price. Wow. UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and others, Morocco will pay the price. Israel will pay a price as well, but I think they will pay a greater price. And it's a message that we have to communicate, that Hamas is symbolic now in the region. It's Iran's front right now, even though it's not its major investment. Hezbollah was a much bigger investment for them. But it is taking on the symbolic significance. Will terrorism win out in the end? Will international pressure overcome the commitment to standards and values and understanding of what the implications would be if in the day after they can shoot a rocket, that Sinwar can walk out, that they can wave the flags and say, you see, we won? That cannot happen.
So what does America not understand?
I don't know if they don't understand. Again, there have been new announcements of arms shipments. I think they understand and support Israel's right to respond. The images and the public pressure about, damage and victims, and that's the constant harangue on the media, American media as well, with a few exceptions. So it takes a toll, and it creates a pressure situation. Even some members of Congress who have been remarkably supportive, start expressing some reservations or concerns, even though I think on any bill on Israel, you'll still get 90%
Now, in terms of the Jewish community, there's right, there's left. It's a very wide spectrum politically. Do you think that we're still seeing unity in terms of the support to Israel, even in wake of the pressures from the United States?
I think that the unity that emerged after October 7th here in Israel was reflected also in America, where from left to right, people rallied and stood with Israel. I think they still continue to stand with Israel. You know, some of them may express it in different ways and more concerned about the domestic population in Gaza, but basically understanding the need not to allow there to be a Hamas victory, understanding that we can't deal with the day after until you deal with the day before, that the needs of Israel have to be met. And you see every day, many, many missions, remarkable numbers of missions of people coming, wealthy people, Amcha people coming to volunteer, coming to give money. There are groups that come for 36 hours, 48 hours, just to see what needs they can help meet. The outpouring of funds, more than $1 billion from America has come to Israel just since October 7th. And I believe it's much more. That's not accounted for because it goes through other channels. So the feeling on the part of the American Jewish community, on the part of many non-Jews, the evangelical community, for instance, stands supportive, even though people highlight that young people are less supportive. The fact is that they've rallied, they've been extremely generous, they were coming here, as are the leaders of the Jewish community. And when you see them working in kitchens, when you see them, collecting fruit, it's the connection, it's the physical and spiritual and moral connection to Israel, I think, has been strengthened. And I will make a prediction for you. Aliyah will sharply increase after the war from Europe and from America. Mm-hmm. For many Americans, it may be half Aliyah, that they will buy apartments, and I believe Israel should do a crash program of building affordable housing for young couples. They want to come. The circumstances in America are not the same. We know about it in Europe. We're learning about America. And I think many are looking to Israel as the viable alternative for their future.
Malcolm, I understand you mentioned people that are coming to Israel to understand from up close what happened. You were here on October 7th.
I was here for Sukkot with my family, and my wife and I stayed afterwards. And I got a call to come the next day to Hadassah because there were some American soldiers serving in the IDF, lone soldiers, and they asked me to come and visit them, which I immediately did. And the first three I met, I knew their families. Wow. And one of his uncle was a very close friend of mine. I knew the father of another one that was there. And they kept saying to me, if you don't see it, you can't tell it. And I said, I'm not good at this. I mean to go down there now, and they're not letting civilians in, or whatever. But I tell you the truth, I couldn't get it out of my head that they said, if you don't do it, you won't be able to tell it. 2 hours later, I was in Sderot, and I was in Be'eri on the day they opened it. And I saw the horrors. I met the people from the rave. I saw the cars on the highway with the windshields shot out, and the back windshields where there were kids, windows shot out. I saw the house in Be'eri, and actually 10 yards from me, they caught a terrorist. I saw his face. I saw his gun, but he gave himself up. And one instance, a young soldier came to me and he said, please come with me. And there was a chewing gum truck there from one of the chewing gum companies. And I was saying, this is really strange. What is it doing in the middle of this place? And all of a sudden, I walked into a brick wall. I could not move. I literally, physically could not move past the smell, the stench. It was like a brick wall. It's like things you read in the Chumash, but you don't understand. I witnessed it. I literally, physically could not get through it. And he pulled me, because obviously others must have experienced it. And he just gently pulled me through. Then he opened the door of the truck. There were 40 bodies already in there, little ones and bigger ones. And then I walked through Be'eri. I saw some of the bodies still were on the side of the houses, and the blood and the. It's such an indelible mark. And I don't know whether it was good or not to see it, because frankly it haunts you I think for all my life. I will. But I realized that what my grandparents experienced when they were deported to concentration camp, what they witnessed, and all the years I've been opposed to comparisons to the Shoah, because while I don't believe the world has changed, I never believed it changed when it comes to Jews, maybe more cautious or different frameworks. But b'chol dar v'dar omdim aleinu. We know that in every generation, the color uniforms change, the language changes, but in every generation, the enemy is the same. The enemy's from without, the enemy's from within. And in fact, there's one of the Gedolim asked, what do you mean? In every generation, wasn't there any that didn't? He said, read the next paragraph in the Haggadah, Seul Mad, where we read about Lavan Bikesh La'akor Sakol. He said, when Yaakov, Jacob, our forefather, thought he was living, he didn't like his father-in-law, and he had a lot of tensions, but his family was growing and all of that. His wealth was amassing.
There was a plot behind it.
All the time. So he said, those generations that think that they're safe, understand beneath the scene there's always boiling.
And so regarding the comparison to the Holocaust?
So I have always rejected it. I no longer do. I believe that this certainly is reminiscent of the mid-1930s. The difference is not that the world has changed, but that we have a state of Israel with an IDF and an IAF, and even if there was some failures, the fact is that the Jewish communities that were endangered over the last 50 years, 60 years, from Russia, from Ethiopia, from Iran, Iraq, Syria, wherever, had a place to come, that Jews can defend themselves. We have communities that don't appear prepared or able to defend themselves. We in America have instituted a lot of new programs to defend our communities, something many people, when we started all of this, didn't even want to hear about, didn't want to talk about, the defense of the Jewish community. Today, it's obligatory, and budgets of organizations, synagogues, institutions, large parts are being devoted to security. The situation is deteriorating rapidly around the world. You see anti-Semitism becoming acceptable again, and Israel looms ever larger in that context for Jews abroad and for Jews here to understand how significant Israel is for the future of the Jewish people.
So you're saying that in the Jewish communities there's understanding about the threats and the challenges of Jewish communities here in Israel. What's important that people in Israel understand about the challenge now, the rise of anti-Semitism in America and in Europe?
For many, there used to be a term that the diminution of the Golah, that the full expression of experience, and then it sort of balanced out, that we had to recognize that there's a role for Golah, there's a role for in Israel. Hopefully more people from the Golah will come. I think today many of those people who loved Israel, cared about Israel, but never thought about living in Israel, today are thinking about it. And young people especially are seeing that the future really lies here. That even in the Golden Medina, you can have our campuses become hotbeds of anti-Semitism, high schools become hotbeds of anti-Semitism, hostile places for teachers and students alike, to see our streets often turned into violent places, and that identifiable Jews and not identifiable Jews are subjected even to physical assault. We're now reaching the levels of what Europe was for a long time, and I believe we watch Europe because it's a lesson for what's coming to America.
And you're saying this after, not long ago, more than 1,200 Jews and Israelis were murdered in Israel, and despite that, Jews feel at home here.
I think Jews feel at home, and they understand, if you die in the streets of New York through an anti-Semitic attack, there's no purpose. That the young people and the people who died here, at least there was a sense of mission, there's a significance to it. It's sad and it's regrettable, and we don't want to see anybody die. And again, all of the questions about October 7th will be dealt with afterwards, but the message was clear. And I think a lot of people came to realize how significant Israel is to them, that too often we take it for granted. And October 7th showed the vulnerability and reminded people of how central Israel is. And that's why they began to come almost immediately, and why they started giving in unprecedented ways to identify with Israel, to be part of Israel, to show the commonality with the state of Israel and the people of Israel.
Every year, when we talk around the gathering of the Conference of Presidents, you mention different things that you're doing, what you're allowed to tell us behind the scenes in terms of Arab states, maybe in light of the Abraham Accords, of course. We mentioned that you're president of the Abraham Spirit Organization. Now, in wake of what's happening in Israel, what's happening in the south, what's happening also in the north, the whole issue of relations with Arab states is not on hold. Everything is happening, but in a different, a different tempo?
Well, many things are on hold. The danger is that if you don't move forward, you move backward. And the Arab states still want the connection to Israel. Many of them are building high-tech cities, Oman, Bahrain, certainly Saudi Arabia with Neom, and they all have told me that Israel is essential to that goal. I even heard it from the leaders in Saudi Arabia about how critical Israeli technology will be for the goals they hope to achieve there. And I think ultimately they know that the connection to Israel is vital to them. The question, when they don't have confidence in the West and even in America's commitment, I think the United States bringing the aircraft carriers was a big boost for that. But when they didn't respond to the initial Houthi attacks, now they are and doing it strongly. But when you see the reflection, then when the UAE says that they're not going to allow American planes taking off from their grounds against Iranian objectives or targets, when the Saudis and others, are playing with Iran, they hate Iran. There is no change in the policy in their understanding of Iran, but it's pragmatic for them. They're hedging their bets because they don't have the sense of confidence. And Iran gets accepted into the BRICS. It gets accepted into the Shanghai Cooperation Council. You see the liaison with Russia and China. And the fact is that the government of Iran is hanging by a thread because the vast majority of the people, I talk to dissidents in Iran all the time, and they tell me 80 to 90% of the people do not support the government. They were told at football games to have a moment of silence for the Palestinians. And when it came to the stadium, not one, not two, 6, 7, 8 of the stadium with tens of thousands of people, they started blowing horns and screaming and yelling and saying, "We will not die for Hamas, we will not die for Hezbollah, we will die for Iran." The West doesn't see it because there's no press coverage. They won't talk about it. They don't tell the truth. That the Iranian government is very unpopular, and if we take the appropriate actions, not just sanctions that hit individuals, but if we took out the oil fields so they didn't have the income, if we really enforced the ban on shipping and all the oil going through China, that Iran makes $1 billion every 8 or 10 days. That's the fuels the terrorism. Without it, they couldn't. So there are opportunities, and despite sometimes the appearance that these countries are bridging with Iran, it's not true. They know exactly what Iran is. They hate Iran. They want to see the Iranian government change. They would like Israel to do the dirty work for them, and if America chooses to. But they also have to have the confidence that America and the West will stand with them against the challenges that they feel. And that has been diminished.
And I'll just emphasize again what you said before. You're saying that despite all the criticism, the Arab states want us to defeat Hamas.
Absolutely, because they know they will pay the price for it. They know that the cost of what Hamas represents. And I will tell you that many of the leaders have said to us, they criticize the Palestinians, they feel some sympathy with the people, but the regime certainly not, and even with the people because they feel it's a kleptocracy, that all the money they've given, tens of billions of dollars, and you look at it, what did they do? They built 500 miles of tunnels. They didn't build the facilities, the infrastructure, things that could have stabilized the area. And if you think of all the hundreds of billions that have poured in over the last 20 years since Israel pulled out, think of what it could have been and what it is.
But you put aside Qatar, right? Qatar is in a different case in terms of Hamas.
I believe that we have to be very direct with Qatar, although they play a role. The Prime Minister has come out very strongly on it. I know others take a more nuanced position, and the United States government says, look, they're playing a key role in the hostage negotiations or in other issues, which is true. But at the same time, they sponsor Al Jazeera, which is spreading almost Nazi-like images of Israel and hostility towards Israel on a daily basis. It's a constant diet that feeds the street throughout the Arab world that watch it. They also are responsible for the funding in America of the anti-Israel activities on campus. We've traced already $13 billion that Qatar has poured into American universities. And part of that is that they get to name the faculty, they get scholarship packages, they have a direct influence, and there's a direct correlation between foreign funding to a university and increased anti-Semitism. It's direct correlation.
What should be done? As you mentioned,
Number one,
it's a
we have to
complex
stop.
issue, Qatar,
Number two, they should be forced to disclose. None of this was disclosed. None of this information has been made public. Universities don't report it. The American government didn't require them. They should have. and to see what the nefarious influence of it, that it doesn't just extend to colleges. We found it in high schools. In New York City, in a high school, they have a map of Israel, a huge map of the Middle East. No Israel. It says Palestine. And when I spoke to the superintendent, he said, "What do you mean? It's been there for 10 years. I said, 10 years you taught this hate? He said, well, it's an Arab cultural thing, which the Qatari fund pays for, and in the high schools in New York City. But we also found things in the kindergartens where they changed the words on the children's song, The Wheels of the Bus, to The Wheels of the Tank. And it's against Israel. And it's so pervasive. And then you wonder, why would they come to campus? Would they not have these hateful attitudes towards Israel and be subject to the propaganda and the mobilizations that are going on? But if you ask them, what river and what sea are you talking about, they don't know. When you ask them, could you tell us, what does it mean for Israel if you do that? You're going to obliterate 9 million people? They say, no, we don't believe in, we don't. They don't even know what they're saying on there. It's total ignorance about it, but they're being taken advantage of. It's a concerted campaign. There are paid activists. We should be exposing everybody who gave money, domestic or foreign, and there have to be real consequences. And I think what happened now with the lawsuits against universities, the exposure of the presidents of Penn and Harvard and MIT at the congressional hearings, there will be many more congressional hearings coming up. There is an awakening to this challenge, but many campuses have become hostile places for Jewish students. And Catholic universities are advertising to Jewish students in ads, we offer you a safe place, because they recognize that many of the campuses in America are no longer safe for Jewish students.
And you're saying Qatar is behind this?
Qatar is a major funder and has been doing it for many years. They've invested about $300 billion in buying businesses, and they use that influence in promoting their agenda, which is an anti-Israel agenda as well. But I think it's anti-American, and I think America has to recognize that while Israel may be the first victim, America will be the next.
Okay, Malcolm Hoenlein, thank you so much for coming to Israel and to our studio.
That was always a pleasure.